This is City Council Vice President Alex Lee. I have the pleasure today to spend time and interview Treasurer Mark Gordan. Treasurer Mark Gordan, thank you for joining us via Skype out of Cheyenne.
Thank you, Alex. It's great to be here. Really is wonderful.
Treasurer Gordan, first question out of the gate is just trying to help the city of Sheridan, our community, and myself for that matter. If you would, just take some extra time and just kind of talk to us about what does the State Treasurer's Office do? What are some of the responsibilities that you have and those type of things? And if you would, just share that with us in the city of Sheridan.
Sure. So the State Treasurer's Office takes care of virtually all the money in the state that resides with the state. For example, if well, let me put it this way. For example, Wyoming Game and Fish, all their funds are in the state agency pool. The, I guess, Department of Transportation, the rainy day fund that we often hear about, all of those things are handled in the state agency pool. The state agency pool accounts for about half of the total corpus of the state. What we have for a total corpus is just a little bit north of $18 billion. The difference is made up with a series of permanent funds. Those permanent funds, the most notable of which is the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund. That was established back in the early 70s by constitutional amendment. Its funds are intended to be inviolate. They're never to be spent. And the income that's derived from those is to augment and help the state's budget. The main difference between the pool and those permanent funds is that the permanent funds are able to invest more broadly in equities as well as fixed income assets. And that's important because our Constitution requires that we not give money as a state to any individual or corporation. So it took that special constitutional provision to allow us to invest in those permanent funds in the stock market. That's all been very, very good for the state. But part of what I guess I'd like to point out is that the income we derive from those investments really go to help the budget, about 15%. So that's one of the main jobs that the Treasurer's Office has. We have a staff of about 9 people that do that. We're very, very small compared to a lot of other state funds that which may be up in the neighborhood of 35 staff or 40 staff. In addition to that, on the investment side, I sit on the pension fund. In a formal capacity there. There's another a little bit north of $7 billion in pensions. Happy to report that we're about 77% funded at this point, which is really pretty good news. That's after having changed last year from a higher investment return to a somewhat lower, more realistic one. So Wyoming is in very good shape that way. The Treasurer's Office also has responsibility for collecting the federal mineral royalty taxes. We work very closely with the Auditor's Office. The auditor is the office that pays the bills. In my capacity as treasurer, I also sit on a number of other boards, some of which have very important aspects to local communities and counties. But let me start with the Wyoming Community Development Association, WCDA. I sit on that. We help low-income, first-time house owners with a variety of products. And that's a terrific institution, was born in also the late 70s and early 80s, and has contributed to a lot of Wyoming's in sort of housing growth. And I sit on the State Loan and Investment Board, the so-called SLIB, which helps with community grants and loans, and the State Board of Land Commissioners, where we make decisions about things like leases and grazing restrictions and special use permits and that sort of thing. Board of Canvassing, which is election results, certifying those, and there are several others.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing with us what the Treasurer's Office duties are and specifically some of the boards that you sit on. You spend a lot of time working with the state budget, also in preparation of the state budget. And along those lines, what is your outlook on the state budget over the next couple years?
Well, yeah, in our capacity, this is a nice office in the sense that we don't have to worry a lot about how that money's spent. That's done by the governor who proposes the budget and the legislature who actually creates the budget. But we do have a good lock, I think, working with some of the other agencies here, Revenue and others, sort of on the economic climate that we see going forward in Wyoming. As you know, and anybody in Wyoming that's near any coal knows, this administration has taken a very hard line and is very actively discouraging the use of coal, which in itself is probably a bit misguided, but certainly problematic for Wyoming. It's reduced the amount of coal that we've been able to mine. I think the numbers off the top of my head, I think we had 415 metric tons that were sold, a million metric tons that were sold last year, or 2 years ago, 388 this last year. More notably and more importantly, though, the new leases that normally Wyoming would have with a more robust coal economy, those two of those leases have gone unbid. And that's a big problem because those coal lease bonuses, the bonuses we get from those leases being signed, actually have gone to build schools. I come from Buffalo, and our new Cloud Peak Elementary School was funded by coal lease bonuses. In fact, every county, Sheridan included, had schools that were partially funded by those coal lease bonuses. But I think long term, say maybe 4 to 5 years out, that source of income probably will rebound a little bit. I'm not as negative on coal as perhaps some might be. Gas revenues were up this year. It was a cold winter. Spot prices went very high, over $1,000 in New England. So our gas revenues have continued to be pretty strong. Oil is coming back in a big way. Johnson County, as you know, Campbell County, both are having little mini booms of oil. Those have all contributed. So we've had a pretty good revenue side, and our investment performance has been really phenomenal. Last year we had almost $1 billion that were derived from our investment activity, 300 million more than we'd ever had before. All of that means that we are in good shape. But I do think the scare we have had from coal being attacked by this administration, from the low prices of natural gas and the sort of, I guess, serendipitous cold winter that we had that brought those prices up. But more notably, there's a lot of gas out there, so the prices should be somewhat depressed. All of those things mean to me, as a new treasurer, that we need to bring a discipline to Wyoming where we reinvest in our permanent funds so that they can grow and deliver more value to the state. We don't. The growth of our funds, just to give you a kind of a perspective on how they've grown. 1968, we had $83 in the checking account. In 2005, we had, I think, $5 billion, maybe $6 billion. We're now sitting at $18 billion. All of that growth has come from our mineral industry. Very, very little of it has come from reinvestment. There is a process that are called spending policies. I think last year there was some discussion about the coffee cans the legislature has. And sometimes those coffee cans contribute a little bit. But I think as a state, looking forward for our future, to be more thoughtful about how we're going to position ourselves. We're really going to have to start to have that discipline to say, part of our budget, we want to make sure we reinvest in those funds.
Okay, well, thank you. Again, this is City Council Vice President Alex Lee visiting with Treasurer Mark Gordan. And Mark, Treasurer Gordan and I are talking about not only the Treasurer's Office, the state budget, the Wyoming's mineral industry, but along those other lines, Treasurer Gordan, you sit on the SLIB board, correct?
Yep.
And if you would please help us to understand, the SLIB board is something that the city of Sheridan has used quite a bit. I extend an apology if you've been had Mayor Kinski tugging on your arm sleeve and bending your ear a little bit. I know how it is sometimes when he's very passionate about a project. So I do extend an apology there. But if you would, take a few minutes and explain how the SLIB grant process works and just kind of in a brief overview, just kind of summarize it for us.
Sure, and let me say, Mayor Kinski is a friend, and I always enjoy seeing him, and he is passionate, and that's good.
Yes.
And we have a lot of passionate people in the state, many towns. The SLIB activity is perhaps one of the most enjoyable things that I think any of these offices can do, because it's your opportunity to get around the state, to understand the needs of communities with their fire departments, their streets, their sewer projects, their hopes for the future with economic development, industrial parks, business committed and business ready programs, etc. So there are a number of grants, and I have a list here because my brain sometimes forgets a few things, but we have the Mineral Royalty Grant Program, the Transportation Enterprise Account, Joint Powers Act Loan Program, Abandoned Mine Loan Program, Clean Water Revolving Fund Account, Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, Farm Loan Program, and a few others. And all of these programs are designed for fairly specific kinds of programmatic needs. We have, for example, in the case of Gillette, they needed more water. And so we've funded a Madison water supply pipeline for some wells that they have, and these are extraordinary expenses for any community to undertake, no matter what size or how great they are. And so it's wonderful that we, as the 5 electeds, have the opportunity to review and vote on each of these grant proposals. There's always a problem with more projects than money. So it really does take a certain amount of review. But as I understand it, depending on what the needs of the particular communities are, they will put forth a grant application. And that grant application goes to the state office of the state lands office. And the staff there will review those, figure out if the grants are solid, well researched, appropriate for the particular program they're requesting money from, and determine an appropriate level of commitment and maybe the terms if it's a loan, and then they will forward those on. I think in a couple of days we have one of those SLIB meetings coming up on the 6th, and we'll have a book, and the book is usually fairly thick, of grant applications, and there's a narrative from the applicant. There is a review of the financials that have gone into that. It's very important to us that communities demonstrate a particular passion for those projects, both in the amount of commitment they make financially to it, and then of course it's always nice to have somebody like Mayor Kinski or yourself or anyone come down to really be there to answer questions, because there are questions that come up, and then we make a decision on the appropriateness, or we make a decision on whether up or down on a particular loan. And in many cases, we take the advice of the staff, but in a few, we often will override the staff's recommendation. One point in example is Midwest, Midwest had need for new fire facility. If you remember last October, we had a terrific snowstorm. They ended up feeding about 300 people, and they didn't really have the facilities to do it, or to house them, or put them. And then, you know, the corridor from Casper up to Gillette's pretty heavily used, so they didn't really have adequate facilities to be able to deal with weather-delayed people. And it also was a great time for their combined fire departments of Edgerton and Midwest to have one good facility that they could keep all of their fire engines in out of the weather. So that's the sort of thing where the staff might have recommended something less than what we thought was actually valuable. But to make those kinds of decisions, you will find the governor, who's often very busy, but particularly as Secretary of State, myself, the auditor, and the superintendent going around to the communities, wanting to understand more about the needs.
Excellent. Again, this is City Council Vice President Alex Lee meeting and visiting with Treasurer Mark Gordan. Along with the slip board projects, and you touched on a few of them, are there some other specific type of projects or specific type of well, I'll just say community projects that the slip board can step in and help out and help a community get over the top and achieve that project? Are there some other examples you'd like to share with us?
Well, there are, from time to time, I'm trying to think of the one in Sheridan, what the name is, but ultimately the recommendations that for business ready and business committed grants and loans that come out of the Business Council, which is a separate agency that has people that review various towns and enterprises and everything from counties to joint powers. They'll review specific projects. So, for example, maybe putting in the infrastructure for a new business park so that they have water, sewer, roads, electricity, communications. Those are all things that we can assist a community in deploying. And what happens there is that the Business Council will make a recommendation. There's several citizens on the Business Council that will review that and put forward a suggestion that the State Loan and Investment Board ultimately ratifies, and occasionally we again don't take the recommendations of the Business Council, make up our own minds on that. But I'm thinking that Sheridan County is the beneficiary of at least one of those parks, and that's all very exciting because, as you know, and I've owned businesses in Sheridan. Way back when we had Abercrombie and Kent on Safari, which was a mail order business, and then owned a bookshop for a while with great partners in Sheridan, and places like Sheridan. It's great to be able to attract those businesses. They're great places to have businesses. But it's important that we make the communities attractive, that we make them up to date with internet access and everything else. And so that's one of the things that's very exciting from my perspective in being able to look at those communities and see how we can help.
Well, along those lines, Treasurer Gordan, if there's an extraordinary project in size in the community, how do communities go about working with the Treasurer's office, or are there grants or programs available for a community to apply for to help out with the assistance of an extraordinary size project?
You know, Alex, that's a great question. There are two. I inherited one and we built one this last session. The first one, we talked a little bit earlier about how the Constitution really forbade us from investing in private entities, or unless it was in permanent funds or something like that. And so the legislature several years ago created a program called the Industrial Revenue Development Bond Program. There have been 4 examples of where we've used it. One was Union Tank in Evanston, which cleans oil cars and does a great job. They've paid off. We had one over the mountain in Shell that didn't turn out very well, and we've just invested in 2 uranium in situ projects that are employing people in Carbon, Sweetwater, Fremont, and Natrona, as well as Campbell, Johnson, and maybe Sheridan. Both of these mines have that we were able to put about $54 million. The threshold for that is a project over $5 million. We invested 34 in one project and another 20 in another project. Very long process. Has been very political in the past. Those who have been in Wyoming for a while will remember some of those. What we did, what I did when I inherited it is I wanted to make sure it was a business program and that we had solid business principles that guided it, not so much necessarily the politics. DKRW, for example, was one of the potential recipients of this program. They never actually applied. But what we did is we established a set of rules. Those rules are out for comment now. On just exactly what the collateral requirements are going to be, et cetera. And the reason we are so severe about that is in the case of this program, we don't actually invest in the project. We buy the bonds that are issued by the county. And so we feel we have to do the diligence for the counties as well as for the state treasurer's office to make sure those funds aren't at risk. But this year, because that program's very cumbersome and takes a long time to take effect or actually work through the whole process, this year the legislature also established a large project fund for extraordinary businesses that might happen. And this goes back to what was a sort of a failed program in the 80s called Amendment 4. It's actually Article 12 of the Constitution. And in that case, the voters of Wyoming then established the opportunity for the legislature by 2/3 vote to put a certain amount of money out in a revolving loan fund. And that money could actually be used to enhance economic development. So we have about $24 million. We have a couple of applicants for that money. And again, we're building rules so that that process, which failed because of its politics, is more business oriented. And I'm actually very excited about that because, we talked a little bit about permanent funds and how we are able to invest broadly. We invest in companies all around the world. Under that permanent fund opportunity. Why not Wyoming, particularly if we can build good businesses?
Well, on behalf of the community and the mayor and the city council, I extend a thank you to you for your support on our projects that we brought before the SLID board. Communities like Sheridan, those are big deals, and they make big changes, and they help set the table.
You bet.
In Sheridan County, we have that economic, and we talk a lot about it. The SLID board and what you do on the SLID board helps us local community individuals and elected officials set the table to grow. And I want to say thank you. Treasurer Gordan?
Well, one thing that came to mind, I was just thinking, we often talk about the hard assets that are there, but there is that one project that was brought, I think, in the last SLID meeting, which was really talking about the general character that both Buffalo and Sheridan are working on. It was about making sure that we had a good representation of art around both communities, and that we had more of it really was emphasizing the cultural attractiveness of the whole region, even into Ucross. And that was another project that I thought was very exciting.
Yes, and all those, as you know, all those things tie in to your community and what makes up your community, whether it's Buffalo or Sheridan. And again, I thank you so much, and I appreciate what you do in the Treasurer's office and on the SLID board. Treasurer Gordan, it has been a pleasure to have the honor to interview you. I thank you so much for what you and your staff do down in Cheyenne, and we look forward to seeing you in Sheridan soon.
Well, as a matter of fact, I'll be in Sheridan tomorrow, so that'd be great. Alex, thank you.
Well, excellent.
Thanks very much.